Hello and thank you for joining us. My name's Sheen, one of the managing editors here at Stratfor, and I'm joined today by Tack, military analyst. Today we'll be talking a little bit about the expansion of airstrikes into Syria. So Sim, around about 4:30 a.m. this morning, September the 23rd, we saw the commencement of airstrikes into Syrian airspace, striking targets on the ground. I think the biggest question initially is, was this a purely US-led operation, or was there any support to United States Air Force?
So while the US did make up the bulk of this operation, there has been cooperation from different countries within the region, namely Jordan, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar. And these countries have contributed to the fighter force that conducted actual bombing. Most of the countries dropped munitions over Syria, while Qatar has allegedly delivered aircraft that were not actively bombing.
Now, you mentioned obviously the air campaign, but there was indeed a naval component as well. How does this fit in with the format that we've seen before of airstrikes taking place? For example, recent air operations in Libya, is it similar?
It is similar in many ways. One of the major distinctions between the operations in Libya and the current operation over Syria is the fact that these assaults have been conducted over a very long range. In Libya, planes were basically able to launch from Malta and Italy, for example, fairly close to Libyan airspace and Libyan targets. While in Syria, we've seen a lot of the planes involved in these airstrikes take off from countries around the Persian Gulf, basically puts their targets outside of the range of those aircraft themselves, making them depend on aerial refueling, which really complicates the logistics of operations like this. As you mentioned, we do have a naval element that also took part in this, where the initial strike in this operation was conducted by Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from guided missile destroyers located in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf.
So you mentioned that the Tomahawks were key to actually initiating the offensive. Did we see a multi-phase operation like previous campaigns?
That's correct. The first phase of the operation consisted of those Tomahawk missiles. They targeted the areas most westward in Syria, around Aleppo and around Raqqa. Then a second phase consisted of F-22 fighters. They struck targets near Raqqa. And then afterwards, a larger force consisting of the carrier force located in the Persian Gulf, as well as several U.S. assets in countries near the Persian Gulf and several regional countries' air forces conducted airstrikes in eastern Syria, closer to the Iraqi border.
Obviously, all the strikes that were conducted were targeted. There was a very clear target set. This was based upon, from what we've seen, target identification, reconnaissance, overflights, and a pack that's been built up over a previous period of time. What sort of targets have we seen? And indeed, was it only the Islamic State that was targeted in the airstrikes?
We've actually seen a great multitude of targets in this operation. We've seen command and control assets, communications infrastructure, armored vehicles, supply depots, both fuel, munitions, training camps. Really, all of these targets combine into the basic assets that deliver IS its offensive capability. And then also other groups have been targeted, such as Al-Qaeda allied groups near Aleppo.
Now, obviously, the battle damage assessments from the strikes will be emerging. We'll soon develop a good picture of what we've actually seen on the ground in terms of actual losses for Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda groups you mentioned as well. But what do you think this will actually mean for the Islamic State as a fighting entity in Syria itself?
So as mentioned, these strikes have damaged the capability for IS to conduct offensive operations. But at the same time, if we're talking about actually destroying IS, about pushing them back from territory that they've conquered over the last months, then you really rely on ground forces, the local anti-regime rebels that are active in Syria or on the Iraqi side of the conflict, the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Iraqi government forces. So in a way, these airstrikes really help the operations against IS. They will go a long way, but they will not be the only thing needed to actually bring IS to its knees.
Now, what we've seen here effectively, this is not an air operation that has happened in isolation. It's more likely the opening salvo of a continued air operations against the Islamic State, specifically in Syria. in addition to the ongoing strikes in Iraq. How do you see the air campaign evolving, or indeed the whole campaign against Islamic State evolving as we move forward?
Right. Like you already mentioned, the first phase that will follow the air operations overnight will be the actual damage assessment. After these nighttime strikes, we'll probably have surveillance aircraft going over there as we speak to try and build a picture of what state IS is actually currently in after these strikes. And then at the same time, we'll see continuing airstrikes in Iraq, close air support as much as possible to Iraqi and Kurdish forces fighting there. And then, as other elements on the ground start building with the U.S. Training rebel forces in Syria, we'll see this air campaign continue to build the pressure on IS because of the risk of airstrikes. And basically, we'll probably see airstrikes in Syria fall into the same type of rhythm that we've seen in Iraq over the last few weeks.
Sim, thank you. That was a fascinating insight into the current situation in Syria. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today, but we'll be closely tracking this evolving situation. Look forward to further updates from Stratfor on this topic.